The truth they told him that day would shatter everything he believed about his life, his past, and the people who raised him. He thought he was just a poor boy who saved a drowning girl, but within minutes he would discover that his rescue was no accident and that her family had been hiding a secret connected to him for years. What they revealed would change his identity forever. It was a quiet afternoon when it happened, the kind of day that feels ordinary enough to be forgotten. The sun hung low in the sky, casting soft reflections across the river's surface. The water looked calm, almost inviting, deceiving anyone who didn't know how dangerous the current beneath could be. He was sitting near the bank, tossing small stones into the water, watching the ripples spread and disappear. His life had always been simple, sometimes painfully so. No big dreams, no grand plans. Just surviving one day at a time, then the scream cut through the air. At first, it sounded distant, almost unreal. He looked up, confused, scanning the river. That's when he saw her. A girl, not far from the bank, struggling wildly as the water dragged her down. Her arms flailed, her mouth opened in a silent cry, and panic filled her eyes. People nearby froze, some shouting, some stepping back in fear. No one moved fast enough. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. His body reacted before fear had time to catch up. He kicked off his shoes and ran, diving straight into the river. The cold water hit him like a shock, stealing his breath and numbing his limbs. The current was far stronger than it looked, pulling him sideways, fighting every movement. He forced himself forward, eyes locked on the girl as she went under once, then surfaced again. Weaker this time. By the time he reached her, she was barely conscious. He grabbed her arm, then wrapped one arm around her chest, holding her head above water. She was heavy, dead weight in his arms, and the current fought them both. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed. For a terrifying second, he wondered if he had just doomed them both, but he pushed harder. Using every bit of strength he had, he kicked toward the shore. The river resisted, dragging at his legs, trying to pull them back. Finally, his feet touched the riverbed. With one last effort, he stumbled forward and collapsed onto the bank, pulling her with him. She lay still for a moment. Too still. His heart pounded as he rolled her onto her side, pressing her back, whispering frantic words he barely understood himself. Then she coughed. Water poured from her mouth, followed by a sharp gasp of air. Her chest rose and fell, and she began to cry. Relief crashed over him so hard his hands shook. People rushed over now, their shock turning into noise and movement. Someone called an ambulance. Someone draped a jacket over the girl. He sat there, on the ground, soaked and trembling, staring at the river as if it might suddenly pull her back again. Minutes later, a black car skidded to a stop nearby. A man and a woman jumped out, their faces pale with fear. When they saw the girl, they ran to her, holding her tightly, crying openly. The woman kept repeating her name, kissing her hair, thanking God. The man's hands shook as he touched his daughter's face, as if afraid she might disappear. Then the woman looked at him. Not just a quick glance of gratitude, but a long, searching stare. Her expression changed, shifting from relief to shock. The man followed her gaze, and his face went completely still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause. They thanked him again and again, their voices emotional, almost desperate. They asked his name, where he lived, who his parents were. He answered simply, confused by the intensity in their eyes. He thought they were just overwhelmed. Anyone would be after nearly losing a child. The ambulance arrived and took the girl away. Before leaving, her parents insisted on getting his number. They said they wanted to thank him properly. He nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, and watched them drive away. That night he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the river pulling him under, heard the girl's choking gasp as she came back to life. He kept thinking about how close it had been, about how 1 second earlier or later, and the ending would have been very different. 2 days later, his phone rang. It was the girl's mother. Her voice was calm but emotional. She asked if he could come to their house. She said they wanted to thank him in person. Something about her tone made his stomach tighten, but he agreed. Their house was large, quiet, and guarded by tall gates. He felt small the moment he stepped inside. The girl was there, looking healthier now, smiling shyly when she saw him. She thanked him again, her voice soft and sincere. Her parents invited him to sit. Food was placed on the table, untouched. There was a strange tension in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. After a few minutes, the mother asked the girl to go to her room. The girl hesitated, confused, but obeyed. The father stood up and walked to a cabinet. He pulled out an old envelope, yellowed with age. His hands trembled. The mother's eyes filled with tears before he even sat back down. They told him saving their daughter wasn't the only reason they called him there. The moment they saw him by the river, they said something they had tried to forget came rushing back. His face, his eyes, a past mistake they had buried to protect themselves and others. As they spoke, his heart began to race. Every word felt heavier than the last. They talked about years ago, about a child who disappeared, about a decision made in fear, about a truth hidden for too long. And as the envelope slid across the table toward him, he realized the reward for saving their daughter was not money. It was the truth about who he really was. His hands trembled as he stared at the envelope on the table. For a moment he didn't move. The room felt too quiet, like the air itself was waiting. The woman wiped her tears, while the man leaned back in his chair, his face heavy with guilt. Whatever was inside that envelope carried a weight that made his chest tighten. Finally, he reached for it. Inside were old documents, hospital papers, a faded photograph, and a birth certificate. His name wasn't on it. The woman spoke first, her voice shaking as she explained that years ago she had given birth to a baby boy. Complications followed. Fear followed. Pressure. From family, from society, from circumstances he couldn't fully understand yet. They were young, influential, and terrified of scandal. A decision was made in secrecy. The child was given away quietly through people who promised it was the best solution. They were told they would never see him again. The man swallowed hard and continued the story. Years passed. They built a life, wealth, respect, and then their daughter was born. They tried to forget the past, convincing themselves the child they lost was better off somewhere else. But the guilt never fully disappeared. Then, by the river, fate stepped in. The moment they saw him pulling their daughter from the water, something shattered inside them. The shape of his face mirrored the man's. His eyes were unmistakably the woman's. It was like seeing a ghost walk out of the river holding their child alive. They hadn't slept since that day. He felt dizzy. His ears rang. Every memory of his childhood flashed through his mind. Growing up poor, never knowing his real parents. Being told vague stories that never quite made sense. The feeling of being different, of not fully belonging anywhere. All of it suddenly had an explanation. He asked one question, his voice barely steady. "Why now?" The woman answered through tears. "Because you saved our daughter. Because if you hadn't been there, we would have lost her forever. And because fate brought you back to us when we no longer had the right to ignore the truth." Silence filled the room again. He stood up slowly, pushing the chair back. His legs felt weak. This house, this comfort, this life suddenly felt unreal. Too much, too late. He told them he needed time, that he couldn't process everything at once. The man nodded, understanding in his eyes. They didn't try to stop him as he walked out. That night, he wandered the streets for hours. Every step felt disconnected from reality. The world looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. He questioned everything he thought he knew about himself, about his parents, about his place in the world. The next day, he went to see the people who raised him. The only parents he had ever known. He didn't accuse them. He didn't shout, he simply asked. And when their silence answered him, his heart broke all over again. They admitted the truth. They had been paid to take him in. Promised it was for his own good. They loved him, they said. And he believed them. But love didn't erase the years of confusion, the unanswered questions, the quiet pain of not knowing where he came from. Days passed, then weeks. The girl's family reached out again, not with demands, but with patience. They offered support, education, a place if he wanted it, but they didn't push. They knew forgiveness wasn't something that could be bought. He visited them again eventually. This time, he noticed things he hadn't before. How the man avoided his eyes. How the woman looked at him with a mixture of love and regret. And how the girl watched him with curiosity, not knowing he was more than just her rescuer. One evening, he sat with the girl in the garden. She thanked him again for saving her life. He smiled softly, realizing that without her, none of this truth would have surfaced. She didn't just give him a reason to jump into the river. She gave him his identity. Slowly, painfully, he began to accept the truth. He didn't move into their house. He didn't take their money. But he allowed them into his life, step by step. Conversation by conversation. Healing didn't happen overnight, but it began. The man apologized properly one day. No excuses. No defenses, just regret. The woman cried in his arms, telling him she had thought of him every year on his birthday. And in time he understood something powerful. The river didn't just almost take a life that day, it returned one. And the boy who jumped in to save a stranger walked out with the truth about who he really was. Years passed, but the memory of that river never faded. It stayed with him, not as fear anymore, but as a reminder of how one moment can redirect an entire life. He had chosen a slow path forward, one built on understanding rather than anger. The truth had hurt, yes, but it had also answered questions he'd carried silently since childhood. He continued living where he always had, keeping his routine simple. But now there were new faces in his life, not strangers anymore. Not quite family either. Something in between, fragile but real. The girl he saved grew stronger and more confident. She often asked him to tell the story of the river, even though she remembered little of it herself. To her, he was a hero. To him, she was the reason his life finally made sense. They shared a bond that went beyond words, beyond explanation. Her parents tried in their own way to make things right. They didn't pretend the past could be erased. They didn't ask him to forget. Instead, they showed up. They listened. They learned how to sit with guilt instead of hiding from it. That mattered more than anything else. He went back to school, something he had once thought impossible. With their help, yes, but also with his own determination. He wanted a future that belonged to him, not one shaped by secrets or fear. Every achievement felt earned, not given. Every step forward was his choice. There were still hard days. Days when anger resurfaced. Days when he wondered who he might have been if things had been different. But he stopped letting those thoughts control him. The truth had come late, but it had come. And that was enough. One evening, years after the incident, they all stood by the same river. The water looked just as calm, just as deceptive. The girl laughed, throwing stones into it the same way he once had. Her parents stood beside him in silence. The woman finally spoke. She thanked him again, not just for saving her daughter's life, but for giving them a chance to face the truth. The man nodded, his eyes heavy but sincere. He told him that some people spend their entire lives running from their mistakes, and that he was grateful fate hadn't let them do that. He looked at the river and realized something important. He wasn't defined by being abandoned. He wasn't defined by wealth or poverty. He wasn't even defined by the truth they had hidden. He was defined by the choice he made that day, the choice to jump, to save someone without knowing why, to act without expecting a reward, and in return, life had given him the one thing he never knew he was missing, the truth. If you want to know how his life continues after this moment, how the bond between them grows, and what the future holds for all of them, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The full story link is in the first comment. Don't miss it.